Yeah. Well, good morning, everyone. Take two. Take two. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. I want to welcome you all to the June 25th, 2026 meeting of the Denton County Transportation Authority Board of Directors. We're glad to have y'all in attendance today, or anyone watching online. Thank you for your interest in our agency. At this time, I'd like to ask Denton County Administrator Jody Gonzalez to lead us in our invocation and our pledges. If you'll please stand. I want to remind everybody to please turn off your cell phones.
Please join me in a word of prayer. Father God, thank you for this opportunity to bring this board together of Denton County Transportation Authority. And we ask that you allow this board to make decisions that would meet your will, Lord. Yes. We know that we do not know what tomorrow brings, Lord, but we do have our faith and know who brings tomorrow. And we have that faith in you every day to allow us to continue to do the work that meet your will. Father, be with each one of our employees and our users of our systems, Lord, to keep them safe each and every day. And we ask that you watch over those folks and make sure that we have good, safe equipment and good, safe supplies and good, safe employees.
Yes.
In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And the Texas flag. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state under God, one and indivisible.
Thank you, Jody. All right. Do you have any special introductions of anyone, Paul? I don't think we really do. Okay, we'll go ahead and proceed over to public comments. Do we have anyone registered for public comments that would like to speak today? Is there anyone in attendance wishing to speak and address the board on items that are not listed on the agenda? Hearing none, we'll proceed forward. Item one is our consent agenda. Members, are there any items you would like to pull off the consent agenda, or do we have a motion to approve it as presented?
Motion to approve as presented.
Second. Motion to approve it as presented. Second. By Mayor Gilmore. Any questions? Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Our consent agenda today consists of item one, consider approval of the regular meeting minutes dated May the 28th, 2026. Item two is consider approval of monthly financial statements for April 2026. Item three is consider authorizing the chief executive officer to award and execute the contract with Capital Insights for state and local legislative consulting services, an amount not to exceed $448,440, beginning July 1st, 2026 through July 30th, 2028, with one additional 2-year option through June 30th, 2030. Item four is consider approval of an amendment to task order number 3 with Lyft in an amount of $25,000 for a total not to exceed amount of $53,125 for taxi services and support of the City of Coppell Workforce Transit Program. And item 5 is consider authorizing the Chief Executive Officer to execute a contract with Texas Health Benefits, TXHB, for medical, dental, vision benefits beginning October the 1st, 2026, in an amount of $2,448,802.56. Next, let's proceed to our regular agenda item, which is item 1, discuss the proposed fiscal year 2027 operating capital budget and reserve policies.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Good morning. It's good to be with you. And we're pleased to be able to present to you today the first look at our fiscal year 2027 operating budget. I'll be joined here at the podium at various times by Ms. Jane Flarowitz, our Senior Manager of Budgets and Grants, and Mr. Derek Sibley, our VP of Finance. And just to start out saying this was a full team effort by all the input of the entire agency to put together the best possible picture we could for you as to what FY 2027 is likely to bring. This is the outline that we'll walk through with you today, provide you a big picture overview and deep dive into revenues, expenses, the capital improvement and major maintenance plan, expanded level projects on the operating and capital side, talk about debt service, and a brief look at the org structure going into next year. I like to start these things out by just taking a big look at how is the agency performing. And, we primarily measure our outcomes through safety, service, and ridership figures. And so on the safety front, the Go Zone service is exceeding its performance last year with an incident frequency ratio year to date on FTA incidents at a 0.14 versus 0.34 last year. I'm proud of the team and their ability to look at what's happening all over the system. And even for incidents that don't rise to the level of FTA reportability, but that could drive root causes that one day could deliver one of these sorts of incidents, we're beginning to have the capabilities in place to have those conversations and make improvements before it hits this page. On the bus operation side, we've strung together a few months of zero FTA incidents. And while we're at 0.75 this year versus 0.72 last year, the big takeaway here is that these are all non-preventable incidents, or what we would call not at fault incidents. So in other words, our operators are operating safely, but they do operate in the public and on the road, and things happen. And so we're really proud of the efforts of the team on that front. On the rail operations side, we look at equipment incidents, both on the rail and at rail crossings. And we're so far running without incidents so far this year. On the service front, want to talk about on-time performance. First on the access service, and our standard is 90%. We're exceeding that. We've talked about the access service as one of our fastest growing. We've also talked about the access service that we've paired the service to run efficiently on a narrower number of windows. And with growth and with more efficient resource deployment, we're still well above our KPI of 90%, which is a great news story. On the fixed route side, you see that our on-time performance has begun to decline somewhat throughout the year, and we are working to understand and be able to articulate to you the traffic hotspots that are happening in the city of Denton. If you've been in Denton lately, the interstate's under construction. That means the frontage roads we operate are under construction. Various roads throughout the city are under construction, and there's just more traffic in general. And so suffice to say, we understand where the hotspots are. We're trying to develop some alternatives to mitigate this, but so far we've been able to manage maintaining a good level of service for our customers with the resources we have out on the road. On the Go Zone side, we look at the two bottom graphs, seat unavailability and wait time. And we started this year with the direction to drive a better equity between the Denton and Louisville Highland Village zones by targeting a 6% seat unavailable in Louisville and a 20-minute in the Louisville Highland Village zone and a 20-minute wait time. You see by the orange bars that we've largely achieved that. And throughout the year, the blue bars about what's happening in the Denton side have stayed within the KPIs, but you see those lines are starting to increase vertically to hit more towards the KPI because we're seeing more demand on the system in general. That's a good thing when it comes to transit ridership, but it's something that we have to watch out for because this is a capacity issue for us. We have begun to drag service hours from the last months of the year into the current months of the year to try to moderate this impact. We've not yet turned loose that additional 300 hours a week of what do we call it, contingency capacity, but we could foresee that we're getting to that point by the end of the year. And so that's something to be mindful of. But overall, still delivering good service on the Go Zone side. And then when we talk about ridership, I'd like to be able to frame up for you how ridership is performing relative to budget growth. And so on the table to the top left, what you see fiscal year 24, 25, 26, OpEx budget actuals, year over year change in the 3.5% to 4.5% range. And if you look at total ridership growth year over year, you see 9% growth in fiscal 24, -7% in fiscal 25, and we look like we might be flat. But this is the reason that we've begun talking about how is the UNT service performing versus how is the core member city services performing, because the decline in UNT ridership is really causing those numbers to change. And so look at the member city ridership column at 1.6, 1.7, 1.8, and you see member city ridership growth maintaining the positive direction year over year. So you all know we're working on efficiencies on the UNT side. This tells us that we're efficiently deploying resources to enable member city ridership growth. So overall, a really good news story. On the fixed route ridership side, I think something to be mindful of is that we are now in our, if we look at 22 to 23, 24, 25, and 26, we're in 4 consecutive years of fixed route ridership growth on our member cities. I think that's a really significant accomplishment for this agency relative to what else is happening in the transit region across the country. Just read an article from a national figure in transit who says people are still talking about pre-pandemic relative pre-pandemic performance. We're well beyond that on all of our modes, especially on the fixed route side. When you consider that we used to have before the pandemic 10 fixed routes in service, and now we only have 3. We've done a lot of really good things over the last several years that's gotten us to this point. So I'm going to turn it over now to Jane, who's going to start walking us through the budget itself. Thank you, Jane.
Good morning, Chair, Board, and guests. My name is Jane Florence. I'm the Senior Manager of Budget and Grants, and I'm going to walk you through the financial overview section. So this particular presentation is a little bit different than the others, whereas I'm going to get to tell you the end of the story first, and then we're going to go into more of the details with the revenues and the expenses and the capital projects. So I'll be going through the overview and the revenue, and then Derek will follow me with the expenses and capital and the debt services. So this is just showing you our budget calendar, showing you our fiscal years from October through September 30th. It shows you kind of work on the budget the whole year, but the focus really is April through July with preparations. June brings us to today, which is presenting our proposed operating and capital budget. And then in July, we'll come forth with a long-range financial plan and any changes that would happen from today. And then with adoption in August, if all goes according to plan. If not, we would adopt in September. This slide is an overview of the budget as a whole. So this is like the last page of the story. And so it shows you the revenues of $81 million, with the lead being sales tax dollars at 41, followed by federal operating grants at 27. And there's going to be a lot more detail in coming slides. So I'm just going to give you kind of the high level, and then we go and we'll break down where all these numbers come and how they get made up in future slides. Our operating expenses at $61.1 million, with purchase transportation being 30 million of that, and followed by salaries and benefits at 15. Our capital projects, so those are projects that we have spent on them, is 16 million. It's broken out into 3 categories: G&A, rail, and bus projects. And we have quite a lot of detail in the presentation on that. Debt services is 1.9 for our bonds that are the 20 and the 21 bonds. And then your summary. So the revenue as a whole, what's coming in, $81 million. And then there's roughly 79 million going out, giving us a net of $1.3 million that we will use for transit asset management and capital projects. Any questions on that slide before I move on? Here's going to be 2 slides. I'm going to do a revenue, then expense, and a capital. So I'm going to give you a pie chart to begin so you can see side by side this year to last year. And then I'm going to give you the details in the next slide. So revenue is up 22.9%. That's primarily due to grants revenue. And so here you'll be able to see what exactly those increases are and or a decrease. So overall, the increase is because of the federal operating and capital grant funding, operating being $18.8 million of that $27 million number, and capital being 8.3. All that ties back to our operating assistance in ADA. In addition to capital, ties back to the capital projects that we have laid out in our capital spreadsheet that we have coming up here. In addition, you'll see passenger revenue is up by $1.1 million. And that's primarily due to the new Frisco Go Zone service. Plus, we're seeing an increase in Coppell Lift. And then contract service.
Jane, if I could just make a comment really quick. We're going to talk, you're going to see a lot, the change in budget related to the Frisco Go Zone service. That is the full not to exceed amount. And as you know, this is an hourly not to exceed contract. So on all of these revenues and expenses, if we don't deploy all the hours based on demand, then all of these revenues or expenses would not be realized. I just want to provide that overall. Thank you.
And then contract service revenue is up about $575,000. That's assuming the status quo service with UNT, but at a $90 service per hour rate, whereas in 26, that rate is $79.50. Now we're looking at expenses as a whole. So we're looking at a $61.1 million budget proposed in 27 versus a $54.2 million budget. And then what makes that up is heavily purchased transportation at $4.5 million. Of that $4.5 million, Frisco Go Zone is $2.9 million. but we're also seeing increases in Vanpool and Coppell Lift and a little bit in Collin County rides that also attribute to that increase. In addition, we have 1.5 million in outsourced services and charges. That's through a variety of areas, including marketing with advertising, social media presence, video production, and more community involvement. Also in IT, we have an enterprise data warehouse that we're proposing. And so that's 350,000 of that. Bus ops has an increase for legal fees, for arbitrations, bus seat furbishes and wraps for our buses. We had moved credit card clearing fees from finance into an operations account. Operations non-departmental account. So it's just a switch. But it's trying to get it to the operations side. We try to get as many things that were operational and function out of G&A and into the operation. So that's why that's there. And then same with facility maintenance. We have more dollars spent in operations part of facility maintenance. So we did some moving there as well. And then a rail pilot program for officer on a train at $300,000. And for salary and benefits, there's also an increase of $872,000 there. It's planning a 5% aggregate salary increase, which includes our COLA and an up to 4% merit rating. There's a 12% increase this year in medical, no increase in dental. And our position count in 26 is 144. Our position count in 27 is going to be 141. Any questions before I move on from there? Capital as a whole is a decrease of 10.6, so $16.5 million budget against an $18.5 million budget. Reasons for that is in 26, we're going to be able to complete the electronic safety and security project and the fiber optic project, as well as the cloud-based phone system and the network switching hardware. In 27, we reintroduce any of the A-Train extension. We also reintroduce TOD dollars. We haven't spent any in 26 yet, but we have budgeted $4 million for TOD in 27, and then also the enterprise data warehouse that I had mentioned. Here you have your 4-year outlook, which is showing you as a whole the total revenues of 84.9, which is a hair different than the other slide. The only reason it's different is because you see that transit asset management, fleet replacement, and rail major maintenance makes up $3.8 million of that. That is money that we're setting aside from fund balance to be able to use for those types of things that are higher dollar in capital. So that gives us the 84.9 minus the expenses that you've already seen, the operating expenses, debt, and capital for 79.7, giving us a net cash of $5.2 million. If we were to do that without the TAM, the transit asset management, it'd be the 1.4 that you saw in that overview slide. Here you have a budget summary. And so what you're able to see here in the operating budget chart here is how everything's broken out. So how our operations part and what those dollars tie to the G&A to A-Train. So you can kind of see how we're weighted with A-Train being the highest cost in the operating budget, followed by Go Zone and then the G&A, but all of that making up to $61.1 million. Our capital budget, including the TAM, the transit asset management, is $20.3 million. And then our debt services is 1.9. And over towards the bottom, we have a chart for G&A to OPEX, and then my next slide will break down that even more. But it's showing you that our G&A to OPEX this year is $18.5 million. And again, like I mentioned, we try to get as many of the operating dollars out of capital into G&A, but there's still some marketing dollars that we have that are for our operations and our working our plan objectives that represent about 1.7 million. If we were to have taken those out, it would give us a G&A of 15.8 for the year. This one also breaks down the G&A just a little bit more. It's just something we've been really cognizant of and trying to pay attention to over the last year or two. And so it's showing, what it's showing you here is as a budget as a whole, we've ranged in the last 4 years from 18.5, which was a tie in 24, and this year in 27, up to 20.9. But if you take our audited actuals, so that's saying what was actually out the door, both for G&A and OPEX as a whole, we come closer to about 17.7. And then we did a little research with NTD data from 24, and this chart down here with all these numbers is to look at our peers. The hard thing is that we don't have an exact peer because there's not everybody that has a rail program, not everybody that has a university program. And so, but to look at it as best we could, either through OPEX or through ridership, we fall in the middle of the pack at $17.8 million. We also feel like We have again, because we're leading the edge of the bus efficiency too. And so it's something we'll continue to look at and be really cognizant of, but we were at least happy to see that we kind of fall in middle of the line of what would be our peer agencies.
And if I could, I
Mhm.
appreciate this question coming from the board. It causes us to pay really close attention, like she said. Also, the learning out of this exercise that was very brief in order to make it into this presentation is the only real way to understand how we rank is versus National Transit Database data, which lags 2 years in arrears. And I'm not convinced that once we learn a little bit more about what that data is telling us, that we don't look even more favorable than this against the peers that we see on this list. So clearly multimodal agency relative to all the people that are above us are really just bus and paratransit. None of them have microtransit at scale. None that I can tell are doing the things that we're doing with modal optimization. And Trinity Metro, while they have all the same modes as us, they're 3 times our operating budget, and it's only a couple of points more favorable. So I think we got a good foundation to build from in order to continue to get more and more efficient in this way. Thank you.
Any questions before I move on? This here was a look at the budget as a whole, knowing that we had an increase in purchase transportation due to service levels increasing of 4.5 million. So when I first looked at the budget and saw that it went from 54 to 61, it seemed a hair alarming, but 4.5 million of that is purchase transportation. So then we took a look and say, okay, with that, we know we have a 12.7% increase in the budget. But if we did not do that, which we wouldn't want to, because we appreciate having the increase in service level, then we'd be at a 4.4% increase, which shows that we try to keep a very level budget. And the primary reason for the increase is purchase transportation, and then of course, a little bit of inflation. Here you have a change in that position. You also have it at your place because it's a lot of numbers. It's kind of hard to see, but you'll have a change in that position, net depreciation with depreciation. Same exact numbers that we have been talking about throughout. You're just able to kind of see it a little more detail, a little more categorized against the different revenue sources, and then broken out by G&A, bus ops, mobility services, and rail. But still giving us the overall budget of 61.12 million against the revenues of 72.5 million, giving us a net income of 19.7. The reason that looks a little bit different than other slides is in change in net position doesn't include our transit asset management, it doesn't include debt services, and it doesn't include capital. So this is just purely looking at OpEx. And then if you were to look at it with depreciation's total represents $10.8 million. So that goes on top of the 61 that was on the other slide to give us a $71.9 million budget with depreciation against the 72.5 million, giving us an 8.9% net position. Questions before I move on from that? All right, now I'm going to move into kind of a little bit more of the detail on the revenue side. So you know what made up all those numbers. This is just the same pie chart you saw before. So I'm going to go ahead and go into the details. I'm basically showing you the revenue drivers here in these next slides. So sales tax history, this is the budgeted history in this blue chart, and it's showing you the increase of the budget between year over year for the last 10 years. Then if you look down in the chart below, you can see the budget against the actuals, and you can see how close we are with our actuals coming into budget. And so I'm excited to see that we're ahead. We're ahead by a little bit, but for this particular year, we're 7 months in, $25.7 million in our sales tax revenue, which is looking really good. It's about 1.8 million up over the sales tax projection, which is just split over 12 months. And so we should definitely be able to meet our 41 million. We have a conservative budget still on sales tax of 41.8, and we're doing more research into sales tax as a whole because it's kind of been cyclical, where it was pretty good and then it kind of has dived, and then now it tends to look like it's picking back up again. But we're pretty conservative, so we have about a 2% increase this year proposed for sales tax. Here we have our federal operating and grant revenue at 18.8. It's made up of our formula fund from section 5307 funds, 5337 STBG funds, and then some 5310 funds. Basically what this is showing you is out of our operating expenses, we're able to cover those 67% of those with grant dollars. So the fixed route up here is at a 50-50, but everything else is pretty much either at 80-20 or at 100%. And so we're thrilled to be able to cover that much of our operating expenses with these particular types of grant funding that we're continuing to get and see increases on. And then we have it from the capital perspective. And so there's a variety of capital projects that are tied back to these grant funds. We have earmarked our capital projects to the expenses. With that said, we are able to cover 90% of our capital expenses with the grant funding, and then the different projects are broken out here. These projects will be coming up in further slides as well, but when you do see that capital spreadsheet, the vast majority of those dollars are going to be covered with grant funding. Here we have our passenger and contract service revenue. So for passenger revenue alone, we have a net change of 1.1 million. The vast majority of that is adding in the Frisco Go Zone service. The other is we're just truly basing on actuals right now and seeing slight increases in those based on that. And so therefore we have like a 49% increase in passenger revenue. And the contract service revenue, I'll have a better breakdown on the next slide, but this is kind of, we'll give you an overview. It's about 11% increase. You'll see demand response directly operators or Frisco. That revenue is going to move into operating grants. So that's why that is in the red, but everything else is in the positive. And probably easiest to show you on this slide how all that's broken out. So for UNT contract, we're going with the $90 service hours with the max hours of 42 hours, 316, which there's no change in service hours, inclusive of the fuel, which is a pass-through cost, lift service pass-through cost of $118,450, and the access to connect service, giving us a total contract service for UNT of 4.4. And then if you go down to Frisco Go Zone, this one's a little bit tougher to understand because it's a bit of a formula, but it's taking the cost of service minus cost of funds that are not eligible for the service minus the passenger revenue, just giving us $379,000 in contract revenue. However, we have an additional $3.2 million in federal operating grants for the program. So it's kind of swapping things on our overall revenue. More is in grants this time and less is in contract revenue. And then mobility as a service is the cost of the service plus a 60% markup for the $68,352 for Coppell Lift. And as I mentioned, that one is a growing service, so it's considerably higher than last year. And then Collin County Rides, similar, the cost of the service plus a 69% markup. Give us a $630,701 revenue. Any questions before we move on to expenses? Thank you.
Good morning. We just talked about the revenue and where it all comes from, and now we're going to talk about where it all goes. So the big theme that I want you to hold on to over this presentation is that our budget is growing, but the growth is really concentrated in one place, and that is through our contracted services that we actually provide to our constituents. So this first graph, let's start looking at kind of the whole picture. As Jay mentioned, our total operating expenses for fiscal year 27 are $61,152,000. This pie graph kind of breaks it down into the three categories that I want you to see the most. One of that, the largest piece of that, is our purchase transportation, which is about 30.8 million, which is just over half of the entire operating budget. And so these are the services that we contract out. This is for Rio Grande for the rail. This is Via for the Go Zone on demand, that's Lyft, Enterprise, those folks that are actually providing the services to our riders. So the purchase transportation is simply the dollar value of the operating contracts. The second piece is the salary, wages, and benefits of $15.6 million. This is just over 25% of our budget. This is all of our staff, administration, planning, finance, operations, customer support, customer experience, and so forth. And then the third piece is the outsourced services and charges for about $8 million, which is about 13.1% of our operating budget. After those three, everything else is comparably small. You have your materials and supplies at 3.1 million, insurance at 2 million, And then you have utilities, employee development, and leases all kind of rounding out the bottom of that slide. So the headline, half of our budget is the cost of running the services. A quarter of the budget is the people, and the rest of it is the support for both of those pieces. So this is now, let's look at what changes from year to year. And I'm gonna split this kind of in the way that we look at our budget, and that is our G&A, our general administration overhead, and then our operations. But the bottom line number is at the bottom of the table, and the total operating expenses are growing from 54,251,000 to 61,152,000, or an increase of about $6.9 million. But here's the part that I want you to notice, and I want you to look at the two columns here. The G&A is actually slightly down from 11,385,000 to 11,333,000. And the operations is up from 42,866 to 49,819. And so you can see that our G&A is actually the overhead of operating the services is actually down, and the cost of the operating the operations and what we're providing is where that comes from. So let me walk you through just a little bit of this. Jane already kind of mentioned this. The salary and benefits up about 873,000 or 5.9%. Outsourced services up about 1.5 million or 23%. Your materials and supplies up about 237,000. Utilities are actually down by about 40,000. We try to decrease that to actually match what we're actually spending. Insurance is up about 15,000, so it's basically flat. Now, a piece to point out there is these are preliminary numbers. We will not actually get the actual premium number until July. And so when we report back to you next month, there's liable to be a change in that amount. And then the purchase transportation is up about 4.5 million or 17.1%. Employee development down 176,000, and then leases down 7,000. So overall, the $6.9 million in growth, 4.5 million of that is, or roughly 2/3 of that, is the purchase transportation. Any questions on this slide? So let's look at the purchase transportation a little bit closer, since it is the highest piece of that. This is the same $30.8 million from the pie chart, now broken down into those 5 different contract pieces. The first one is the Go Zone, which is about 15.1 million, up 3.2 million. This is the single biggest piece of the increase. It's almost entirely the additional Frisco Go Zone amount. The rail, about 13.4 million, up 417,000. This is our contract with Rio Grande Pacific, and it is basically the escalation that is in that contract. Mobility as a service, about 1,659,000, up about 764,000. This is our van pool, Capel Lift, UNT Late Night, and our guaranteed ride home program. And the growth here is led by our van pool program that we'll look at here in just a second. And then the Frisco demand response, about 269,000, and Collin County rides about 373,000, both up, just a slight amount. So the total ties out to that 4,494,000. But the key takeaway is the budget grew because we added services. It's not because our operations got more expensive. It's because we added those services. The contracted services for our non-member cities. I want to pause on this slide because it answers a question that I think comes up, and that is, if Frisco is driving the increase in our services, who is paying for it? And the answer is not our non-members, or excuse me, not our member cities. So here's the principle behind this is on our member cities, funds DCTA through the sales tax. Services in those cities is part of what that sales tax buys. But when we deliver services to those outside non-member cities, for example, Frisco, Capel, Collin County, our policy is that those services must recover their full cost. They are not subsidized by our member city sales taxes. So this table kind of shows that recovery at work. So take the Frisco Go Zone, for example. The cost to provide it is $2.9 million. We add an administrative fee and a non-member fee, bringing that total cost of service to that $4.7 million. Every dollar that is recovered through passenger revenue or contract revenue from the city of Frisco or grant revenue. So the same structure applies to the Frisco demand response, Capel lift, and also to Collin County rides. So the connection is between this slide and the revenue section that Jane talked about is that the purchase transportation expenses you saw go up 4.5 million is matched by an offsetting revenue. So when we see an increase in that purchase transportation, a lot of times it is offset by an increase in revenue from our non-member cities. So this is looking at the slide for our Go Zone for our member cities. The mechanics are simple. We pay a contracted hourly rate per vehicle hour, multiplied by the maximum number of hours, kind of like what Paul mentioned. So for fiscal year 27, that rate is $46.30. That's up a modest increase from the $44.95 from last year against a budgeted maximum vehicle hours of 250,495, which comes to the $11.6 million. On top of that, we pay via a customer service charge of about $635,000. So for a member Go Zone city, total of $12.2 million.
Question about that.
Yes.
So this is the number that we're using for, within the budget. I know last month we talked about the possibility of changing up that customer service situation. So how are we budgeting, assuming everything stays the same?
Yes, ma'am. So this is assuming that we carry into fiscal 27 under the same structure. We anticipate launching the phone system that you all approved last month and having that in place, and then being able to bring back a decision for you all to in-source customer service based on the business case for that. When that time comes, then we would do a budget revision at the same time to reduce the via customer service cost and provide the offsetting resources to in-source it. But today, since that decision hasn't been made, we're assuming status quo in the budget.
Okay, thank you.
So here is the new service with Frisco. Same model, slightly different rate, $46.45 per vehicle hour against 62,640 vehicle hours for a total of $2.9 million. That hour count reflects the contract design, 20 vehicles per hour, 12 hours a day on weekdays. And to tie this back 2 slides, this $2.9 million exactly the cost we showed being fully recovered on our non-member city slide. This slide simply consolidates the two, our member cities at $12.2 million, Frisco at about $2.9 million for a total Go Zone purchase transportation budget of $15.1 million. That's the same figure again from the summary tab that we looked at a while ago. These are 2 of our smaller contracted services. Frisco demand response is budgeted at about $269,000. Collin County Rides is at $373,000. Both, again, are non-member services. Consistent with the principle that we talked about before, both are structured to recover their full cost through the contract and grant revenue. This slide is detailing our mobility as a service budget. Our van pool that's been mentioned is operated through Enterprise. That is the largest piece at $1,488,000. And it is our fastest growing service, up about 35% when you on the ridership side. UNT late night with Lyft is $118,000. Compel Lyft is at $43,000 and a guaranteed ride at $10,000. And then the last slide is on the purchase transportation is the A-Train operations, again with Rio Grande. This is kind of a comprehensive look of the operating and maintenance contract. The table shows where each one of those pieces sit. So the train crew hours at about $3.8 million, the car miles at $1.7 million, and then your management and administration, dispatch, facility, vehicle maintenance, maintenance of way, positive train control, all kind of wind up the rest of it. The contract total is the $13,210,000, and there is $150,000 contingency that is budgeted in there, which makes that total cost to come to $13,360,000. So on the expense side, the one thing again to keep in mind is our operating budget grew by about $6.9 million. 2/3 of that is the purchase transportation, and that growth is really offset by matching revenue from the new services that we are now providing. So without the purchase transportation, as Jane mentioned, our budget would go up 4.4% instead of the 12.7%. Any questions on the expenditure side? Now looking at the capital side, we'll shift to these capital dollars. Again, framing this kind of as well, a large share of our capital is grant funded. So a lot of what you see as far as these capital projects, a lot of these dollars come from those federal grants and not necessarily 100% out of DCTA's own pocket. Our proposed capital budget for fiscal year 27 is $16.5 million, and we divide that into three different buckets. One is the G&A of about $8,950,000. And, but despite kind of the name with that, there's two big dollar projects that are involved with that. And that is the O-Town TOD and the A-Train extension design that fall into that category. We have bus capital at about $4 million, which is 24% of the total. And then rail capital at $3.5 million, which is 22% of the total. I know this is a little hard to read, and I don't expect you to be able to see it. On the next two slides, we kind of zoom in a little bit closer for you so that you have that. On this side is the proposed budget for the fiscal year at $16.5 million. So on the bus, looking over there on the right-hand side, on the bus and rail side, it is largely about keeping our fleet and facilities healthy. So that's 3 new buses and a refurbishment, new vans, a bus wash rehabilitation, flooring and lighting at our maintenance facility, a rail train wash rehab, rail major maintenance. On the strategic side, again, like I mentioned, it funds O-Town TOD and then the A-Train design support. On the technology side, we're talking about data warehouse and dashboard and the continuation of our transit asset management program. Just kind of looking at it a little closer. This slide is looking at the capital improvements and the major maintenance as far as for our our bus and our rail. On the first page there, the bus and rail services for fiscal year 27. The notable bus items is the fleet purchase for $2.7 million. The 2006 bus refurbishment at $600,000 and 3 revenue service vans and several facility items that are mentioned there. For example, like air compressor, bus wash rehab, flooring and lighting projects. On the rail side, the large item is just the rail major maintenance that's coming in at $3.1 million.
I have a question, and I think you may have answered it because you said earlier that this isn't necessarily meaning that this is something that we're paying for with cash right now. Like some of this may be grant related, but when I'm looking at the A-Train downtown Carrollton extension, it's got that full 117.5 in there that we discussed last month, but that's there, some of the, I mean, because we know we got a grant from COG and
That's right.
we submitted a build grant. So this is not suggesting that we're funding it all in these couple of years with our capital.
Correct. This is a snapshot just of the capital. Next month, when we do the long-range financial plan, and in the currently approved long-range financial plan, you see these expenditures, and then at the bottom, you have revenue sources that are the grants and things like that we're talking about.
Okay.
So the purpose of this conversation is just to identify what are the expenditures, and then next month, we will talk about big picture, how those things match up to grant and other funding sources.
Okay.
Nothing has changed substantively from what we briefed last times, in other words.
I think it will with the long range financial plan will be a little clearer for the whole project. This slide looks at really the G&A services and the transportation reinvestment program. Again, the 2 headline G&A items are the $4 million for O-Town TOD, and then the A-Train design support at $4.5 million. There are some smaller G&A items in there, $350,000 for data warehouse and $100,000 for backup and disaster recovery upgrades. On the trip program down at the bottom, you'll see those items are really kind of parked there with nothing really proposed for 27. This is an item that we will talk more about with the long range financial plan when we bring that to you in July. Now, looking down at the very bottom, I want to point out that there are 2 different totals there. One of them is the total capital budget with TAM at $20,331,000. And then the total capital budget without TAM at $16,531,000. So the 16.5 million is the figure that we've been using throughout the budget. This is the capital program things that we are programming directly. The difference between the two, that $3.8 million, is the TAM reserve program, which is the funds that we put aside savings for future capital needs that need to be met.
I have one more question. I'm sorry.
Oh, you're fine.
So when we're looking at these capital budgets and these numbers, like for example, for the Old Town TOD, this is presenting in a way that looks like we're paying cash, in 2 years for that. If we decide to finance that in some way, how does that change? I mean, that obviously changes the outlook because we're not spending 30 million in 2 years on the
Right.
project. But
And the borrowed funds come into the revenue side of the long range financial plan, offset the expenditure, and then the glide slope for the fund balance extends based on that.
okay, I don't know when I don't recall having a discussion about any of that.
We have not talked about that with regard to the Old Town site. We are nearing the end of our selection process for our developer partner. Our next update to you is going to be, here's the developer partner, here's the framework of our discussions with them, and there's a many steps to go through before we say this is the cost of the project and this is how we're going to pay for it. But certainly it's on the radar. This money is here, however, for the purpose of continuing to progress the design, and this will be out of pocket cost. But this is before the turning dirt
You mean the
phase.
4 million?
Right, right.
Okay, yeah.
And then the last piece of the expenditures really has to deal with the policies that kind of govern the whole thing. Every year, as part of that, part of the budget process, you guys as a board adopt a reserve fund policies. So we hold 4 of those policies and want to look at those. The first one is the fund balance reserve. That's kind of our core operating cushion, if you will. This policy holds that we have 3 months of operating expenditures in this reserve. So for fiscal year 27, the operating budget of 61.2 million. That's a target of roughly 15.3 million is your 3 months of operating expenses. The other one is a sales tax stabilization fund, which again protects a single largest revenue source in our sales tax. The target is 3% of our budgeted sales tax each and every year, which would be about $1.25 million for fiscal year 27. We also have a fuel stabilization fund. Kind of does the same thing with the price of volatility of fuel. It's sized at 50 cents per gallon of budgeted fuel, which gives us kind of a buffer to absorb any kind of price spikes that might occur without having to actually go out and reopen the budget and do budget amendments. And then the capital replacement infrastructure maintenance fund, which ties directly back to the capital plan that we just talked about. And that is basically the TAM, the $3.8 million in savings that I showed you on the last slide.
Derek, just a quick more observation. Did you have to dip into the fuel stabilization fund this year?
I don't believe we did. No,
Okay.
We budgeted enough that we were still in the good.
Great. Thank you.
Hopefully that with prices going down, we can continue that. So.
Thank you, Derek. I'm going to take us through the last section of our presentation here and talk about expanded level projects. So you just saw in the capital plan how these things fit into the big picture. You're going to see many of these same things again, but I just want to provide a 30,000-foot overview as to how we're using these projects. All of the details were sent out in the packet, and certainly if you have any questions, we'd be happy to deep dive on any of them. But if I could just take at a high level, the first couple that you see are really about fleet maintenance on our buses. We bought 6 buses from Gillig that'll be delivered by the end of the year. We bought 3 from Dart that have already been delivered and in the process of being placed into revenue service. And we've got 3 more in the budget based on the grant that we won. We have 1 bus currently in the repower process with a vendor. And if that goes well, then we'd like to do another one. If it doesn't, it's going to affect how many buses we buy new in the outcoming years. In addition to that, though, we have a need to present a better product for our customer. And so for the buses that haven't been touched through a refurb process just yet, we want to have this allowance for refurbing the seats and rewrapping the exterior of the buses. This will give the passengers the ability to sit on cushions that look new, smell new, and then the buses will have a fresher look. And I would argue that when someone is riding a bus that's been treated like this, they will not know that they're on a new bus or an old bus because those are the pieces that they touch most often. Similarly, on the rail side, we have the opportunity to refresh our seats. The seats in the train are original to the equipment. They're fabric. The fabric pattern is out of print and beginning to show signs of wear and tear. We'd like to start the process of rehabbing those seats. We know a little bit like it's going to be multiple years and it's going to be a significant cost. And so this is an allowance to allow us to get that process started so that we can bring you a more complete program in the coming years. Also on the train, I think it's really incumbent upon us to make sure that we have a high degree of safety and security. And we've got a great partnership with the Denton County Sheriff's Office, have for a long time. We currently have one full-time officer assigned to the entire DCTA system, and he is doing a great job and riding the train often, but I'd like for there to be more of him, frankly. And so we're working with the sheriff's office to figure out if that's supplemental part-time help from the Denton County Sheriff's Department, or maybe a couple of more full-time employees. And so that's what that allowance is all about. If safety is the most important thing we do, I think this is a proper investment for us to be making. On the planning side, you see a number of projects of various sizes, all of them pretty small. On the ADA transition plan, this is a regulatory need that we have to do. Now, since we transitioned the NTMC organization into ours, we tripped some personnel thresholds that requires us to make sure that all of our buildings and prove that all of our buildings are meeting ADA standards. We're continuing our bus stop design support so that we can get those bus stops up to standards with a pad, sidewalk connectivity, all that sort of thing. We did some work this year to create landscape standards, and we'd like to take the first shot at a new landscape design at the Highland Village Louisville Lake Station. Remember, our priorities are xeriscaping, native plants, minimizing irrigation, and certainly would have the board involved in that design process as it goes along. The on-call services and strategic planning services are things that we have used this year to help lever our staff to do more of the types of analysis that you saw our staff doing through the intermediate service plan, things like that. And then as the conversation about transit-oriented development comes forward in the city of Denton, at the downtown Denton Transit Center and the Med Park Station, we have a little bit of an allowance to allow us to continue that work, as well as the Old Town Louisville site. Any questions about those? Any of those? Okay. I will, let me go back, and this is we've been working really hard on our bus fleet redesign and our Go Zone fleet redesign. This is a pretty good mock-up of what the buses are going to look like. We've done a lot of work to figure out what are the right colors. There's many shades of green, there's many shades of gold and blue, but the team's done a really good job. And so when the buses show up, they're going to look like this. And you all have already seen the new design on some of the Go Zone vehicles. So we're really excited about that.
Well, I did have one question about the
Sure.
refurbishments of the buses.
Yeah.
As I was looking at, I think it's slide 55. Can you remind me why we chose to refurbish the 2006 buses and not the 2011 ones?
There are, at a very high level, as emission standards evolve and equipment on buses evolve, sometimes those things are more reliable and sometimes those make the bus less reliable. We're focusing our rehab efforts on the buses that have proven themselves to be the most reliable to minimize time in the shop.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Good question. One more. Here we go. Okay. On the capital side, you see the similar sorts of themes, money going to operationally focused items, things that the customers are going to experience. On the fleet repurchase, there's the 2.7 million that's going to be offset by grant revenue, the bus refurbish. On the fleet side, this is related to our access fleet, and what we have found through a pretty significant data exercise is that we operate these cutaway buses that can accommodate multiple wheelchairs and multiple passengers, but they're expensive to operate. When we dug into the data, we found that only a small number of our passengers actually need wheelchair accessibility, and even less of the time are we moving multiple wheelchairs at the same time. And so rather than spending 200,000+ a copy on cutaway buses, we're asking to buy 3 wheelchair accessible vans that look a lot like the Go Zone vans that are riding around in the system right now. And so that we can pilot this idea that we can operate a paratransit service on a smaller vehicle to provide a better customer outcome as well as a more cost effectiveness. I'm really proud of the team that they were willing to think outside the box and challenge the status quo on the type of vehicle we operate. And I think this helps us to grow in the future as we see what the needs are in our member cities and across the region. We have non-revenue fleet replacement that is not adding to the fleet, but rather taking care of vehicles that are of the 2009 vintage and at their end of their useful life. You see a lot of items here, the bus wash rehab, the train rehab, flooring and lighting maintenance that is really tied to the fact that many of our facilities built in the 2011 timeframe, the 2002 timeframe, and just systems that are coming to the end of their life and that need to be replaced. I want to talk, well, on this slide, we'll talk about A-Train, Old Town TOD, which we addressed, the A-Train design support for downtown Carrollton Extension, and then the data warehouse and a minor IT upgrade project. Any questions on any of those? I do want to jump into, I'll highlight rail major maintenance because I think there's an important story to talk about there. So you're used to seeing a slide that looks like this every year that identifies what it is that the train requires. As Rio Grande Pacific, our contract operator, says this is what we think needs to be repaired. Over the course of this year, what we found is some of these items, and you can see they're all high dollar. Some of these items had the ability to be extended because they were not quite yet at the end of their useful life. So rather than spending capital before it's due, as long as we're maintaining safety and service, then what's happening in this year's budget is we're carrying forward about 70% of this ask is carry forward from fiscal year 2026. It's not because we couldn't execute it or didn't execute it. It's just because we took a look at it and said, I think this has time. You've given us the ability to spend the money if we have to, but we're trying to spend dollars just in time, again, while maintaining safety and security. So I think it's important for you all to highlight, and we appreciate your willingness to give us the budget and then the flexibility to execute when the time is right. So if no questions on those, then we'll talk about debt service and then I'll be back to wrap us up.
The last piece is debt service. We're going to look at, we carry two outstanding bond issues. The 2020 bond issue refunded our 2009 issue. At the end of fiscal year 27, there will be about $7.1 million remaining on that. And the debt is fully retired in 2032, and it carries a fixed interest rate of just under 1% of 0.99%. The 2001 bond refunded our 2011 issues. Our 2021 refunded our 2011 issuance. At the end of fiscal year 27, there will be about a $6.3 million remaining outstanding. It will be retired in 2031, and it has a fixed interest rate of 1.28%. So for 2027, the table over there on the right-hand side shows what we actually pay. So for the 2020 issuance, we'll pay $855,000 in principal, $61,000 in interest for a total of $917,000. And on the 2021 issuance, about just over $1 million in principal, $68,000 in interest. So the total of $1,073,000. And together for our fiscal year 27, we will pay roughly $2 million or $1,990,000. And just for perspective, that $2 million in debt service is roughly about 3.3% of our $61 million operating.
And then for the last item on our agenda here for this briefing is just a review of the DCTA organizational structure. As we talked about at the outset, we've found the opportunity to drive efficiencies and reduce the total headcount at the agency by 3 positions. This was not, these were vacant positions that we're able to take off the books, and you see those reduced headcount up there. The 141 total authorized does include 1 position that's fully funded currently by grant money in support of contracted services. the reason that we've been able to take this step forward, number one, is because the team has done a really great job of even more cohesive than it ever has been before. That allows people to work more efficiently across departments, collaborate more, and leverage tools like emerging AI opportunities that are coming out in the marketplace. And it's been really cool to see how analysis that used to take weeks takes hours. And so I expect that we'll continue to find these sorts of efficiencies, and that's what's going to allow DCTA to lead in the region and lead in the transit space overall through this team that we've put together. Here's how that staffing breaks down from a position count. You see allocation by title, a good pyramid shaped distribution, and then how that headcount has evolved over time. Any questions about that?
So I think I know the answer, but I'm just gonna ask. So when we talked about last month with potentially pulling the call center, and we were talking about adding staff for that,
Mhm.
that's not included.
Correct.
Because we haven't fully approved.
Correct. That's a trade-off of the money that we're spending on VIA. We're gonna spend those dollars on heads, and that's an individual business decision that's based on the favorable finances at the time. Okay, with that, that brings us to the end of the fiscal 27 budget presentation. Happy to answer any questions that you all might have, or if this seems good to you, then we're just looking for some direction to continue proceeding as we are. We will be bringing back next month some significant analysis of our long-range financial plan and all these big rocks that we're trying to move forward and how that impacts our cash flows over time. But if no other questions, Mr. Chairman, I can turn it back over to you.
Well, I just wanted to tell y'all how impressed I am with all y'all's hard work in getting us to this point. There were some great questions this morning. And so, members, do you have any other questions or comments about the budget process? Yes, Ms. Rumor.
Make a quick comment that I also appreciate the searching for efficiency and the creativity of trying to do different things to see where we can find new efficiencies. And so I really appreciate staff's work on that as well.
I'd like to also follow up on that and say the same general thing. I could tell you seeing other organizations that would have continued to buy cutaway buses and not blink. And the fact that you guys took the time to think about it, that speaks volumes for your leadership and the people in this organization that are willing to think, like you said, outside the box. I think that's just great. And I just really want to highlight that. Thank you.
Sir, thank you.
And similar comments, everything you presented, there's no surprises even going forward and looking into the future. It's almost as though you have a plan. So I think that's great. And that speaks volumes to your leadership and your team. So thank you all very much.
Yes, it was the men and women that are doing all the work and these ideas. What's great is the ideas come from all different directions. We get to work on them together and bring them forward, and it's really fun. So thank you.
Perfect. Very good. No action on that today. Thanks. Our information reports. One is the safety service and ridership reports. Paul, did you want to highlight anything as related to that?
Yes, sir. Just to say that, as I pointed out at the beginning, demand for service is increasing overall. It's increasing in non-member cities. It's increasing in our member cities. You see the Go Zone KPIs are starting to push the limits in Denton. It's something that we're going to have to pay attention to make sure we keep meeting expectations.
Perfect. Good. Thank you. All right. Next is item 2, which is update on Denton County Transportation Authority securing an agreement for an advertising revenue agent. Go right ahead.
We gave a briefing, you all approved an advertising revenue policy. We're really close to a piggyback sort of arrangement on a DART contract to allow revenue to be generated off of our assets. So anticipate shortly a briefing to approve that agreement.
Perfect. Next is the update on the sales and use tax compliance review and recovery services. Anything to report on that?
No, sir, just as written in the memo.
Okay. And for update on the renewal of the rail operating liability insurance policy. There was a memo related to that as well.
And I think it's important to note here that the Federal Railroad Administration has a statutory requirement to increase the liability, the limit of liability. That drives an increase in our premium. That premium increase is baked into the budget, but it continues to underline the costs associated with operating a railroad.
Very good. To report on items of community interest, members, Joe, anything you would like to mention? To promote or celebrate or anything? Is there anyone that want to comment on items of community interest? All right. Next this is our executive session item. The Board of Directors will convene into closed executive session pursuant to Texas Government Code, Chapter 551, Subchapter D, Section 551.0712, consultation with attorney to discuss and receive legal advice on the following out of the University of North Texas Interlocal Cooperation Agreement. And it is 11:11, and we are in executive session. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, everybody, it is 11:49 and we have reconvened out of executive session. There'll be no action on that item today. Pardon me, there'll be no action on that today. I would like to remind the public of our next meeting. When is our next meeting? July the 23rd will be our next regularly posted agenda item and meeting. And without any other action before the body, I would just like to wish everybody a very happy Independence Day as we celebrate this milestone in our nation's history. So thank y'all so much. We are adjourned.